Traoré's name dragged into billion-dollar scandal, and Zambia just hit back hard. Zambia says, enough. EU and UK facing billions in demands after shocking exposé. Is Traoré being targeted? The truth behind the EU, UK, and Africa's billion-dollar war. This African scandal just went global, and it involves Traoré and dollar billions. Breaking, Zambia drops bombshell on EU/UK, Traoré's name surfaces in global clash. You won't believe what just came out about Traoré. Africa demands justice. The West is panicking. Zambia and Traoré want their $50 billion back. Traoré and Zambia are done with the West. Billions at stake in explosive scandal. Exposed. The scheme that cost Africa billions. Now Zambia fights. Back with Traoré. This is bigger than you think. Zambia's bold move with Traoré shocks the West. Scandal exposed. Zambia has finally said enough, and is now joining forces with Captain Ibrahim Traoré in an unprecedented billion-dollar clash against EU and UK exploitation. This video reveals how African leaders are uniting to reclaim their continent's wealth, challenge foreign dominance, and ignite a new era of independence in Africa. President Hakainde Hichilema is demanding billions in reparations, sparking global outrage and support alike. As Burkina Faso, Zambia, and other African nations rally together, the Western agenda is crumbling under the weight of truth and justice. Watch now to see how this alliance could shift the power dynamics between Africa and the West forever. 1. Zambia joins Traoré. The notion of Zambia joins Traoré likely refers to Zambia aligning with or expressing solidarity with Burkina Faso's Captain Ibrahim Traoré, a figure who has gained prominence for his anti-colonial rhetoric and leadership in Burkina Faso's military junta since his 2022 coup. Traoré has positioned himself as a champion of Pan-Africanism, advocating for African nations to reclaim control over their resources and resist Western influence. Zambia, under President Hakainde Hichilema, has not been explicitly documented in the provided sources as formally joining Traoré's movement or the Alliance of Sahel States, AES, which includes Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger. However, posts on X suggest a narrative where Zambia is aligning with Traoré's ideology, particularly in demanding reparations or challenging Western policies. For instance, a post claims Hichilema demanded refunds for non-refunded visa fees, framing it as part of a broader push for African dignity and self-reliance. This claim, however, lacks corroboration from credible news sources and appears speculative, possibly reflecting social media sentiment rather than official policy. Zambia's involvement could be interpreted as part of a growing Pan-African sentiment, where leaders express frustration with Western dominance, particularly in economic and resource exploitation. Hichilema, known for his pro-business stance, has focused on economic reforms and debt restructuring in Zambia, but there's no direct evidence in the provided references of Zambia formally aligning with Traoré's revolutionary agenda. Any alignment may be symbolic, driven by shared frustrations over historical exploitation, rather than a formal political or military alliance. 2. EU-UK Scandal Africa. The phrase EU-UK Scandal Africa is ambiguous, and the provided references do not explicitly detail a specific scandal involving the EU, UK, and African nations in 2025. However, the context of Traoré's leadership and Zambia's alleged demands for reparations suggests this could refer to accusations of Western exploitation or unfair economic practices, possibly tied to historical colonial legacies or modern trade imbalances. Posts on X repeatedly mention a Traoré exposed scandal alongside Zambia demanding billions from EU and UK. These posts link to YouTube videos, which are not verifiable primary sources, and their identical phrasing suggests a coordinated narrative or misinformation campaign. Without concrete evidence, such as official statements or detailed reports, this scandal remains speculative. It may reflect social media amplification of grievances against Western visa policies, trade agreements, or historical reparations, but no specific billion-dollar scandal is substantiated in the provided web results. Historically, African nations, including Zambia, have criticized the EU and UK for unfair trade practices, such as restrictive visa policies or exploitative resource extraction. For example, Zambia's copper industry has long been dominated by foreign companies, with profits often flowing out of Africa. The lack of clarity around a specific 2025 scandal suggests this could be an exaggerated or fabricated narrative circulating online, possibly tied to Traoré's anti-Western rhetoric. 3. Ibrahim Traoré latest news. Captain Ibrahim Traoré, Burkina Faso's 37-year-old junta leader, has become a polarizing figure in African politics since seizing power in September 2022. Recent developments in 2025 highlight his growing influence and controversial policies. Pan-Africanist appeal. Traoré's rhetoric of economic self-reliance and anti-colonialism resonates widely, particularly among African youth. His actions, such as expelling French troops in 2023, nationalizing gold mines, and building a gold refinery, have bolstered his image as a revolutionary leader. A viral deepfake video in 2024, showing Traoré calling for African unity, further amplified his popularity, despite its inauthenticity. International alignments. Traoré has strengthened ties with Russia, meeting President Vladimir Putin in Moscow in May 2025 to discuss economic and security cooperation. This pivot reflects a broader trend among Sahel nations, Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, moving away from Western alliances toward Russia, amid accusations of Western neo-colonialism. Domestic challenges. Despite his popularity, Traoré faces criticism for authoritarian tendencies and a worsening security crisis. Jihadist attacks and government forces have killed hundreds, and economic development remains stalled, with Burkina Faso's mineral wealth not yet translating into broad prosperity. A foiled coup attempt in April 2025 led to mass rallies in Ouagadougou, with supporters denouncing foreign interference, particularly from the US and Ivory Coast. Regional influence. Traoré's leadership in the AES and his appearance at Ghana's presidential inauguration in January 2025, where he received significant applause, underscore his regional influence. His policies, such as rejecting the CFA franc and redirecting wealth to grassroots development, have inspired solidarity protests across West Africa. Traoré remains a symbol of resistance but also a lightning rod for criticism, with detractors warning of democratic backsliding and reliance on Russian support. 4. Hakainde Hichilema speech. Zambian President Hakainde Hichilema, in office since August 2021, is known for his measured, pro-economic reform approach, contrasting with Traoré's revolutionary style. The provided references do not detail a specific 2025 speech by Hichilema tied to the themes of African unity or reparations. However, a post on X claims Hichilema demanded refunds for non-refunded visa fees, framing it as a challenge to Western systems draining Africa. This claim is unsubstantiated by credible sources and may reflect social media exaggeration. Hichilema's public statements often focus on economic recovery, debt restructuring. Zambia defaulted on its debt in 2020, and attracting foreign investment while addressing historical inequalities. In the context of African unity, he has engaged in regional diplomacy, such as hosting Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky in April 2025, signaling Zambia's role in global discussions. A speech demanding reparations or aligning with Traoré's anti-Western stance would mark a significant shift from Hichilema's known pragmatic approach, and no such shift is confirmed in the available data. If such a speech exists, it may have occurred in a regional forum, e.g., African Union, or a domestic address emphasizing Zambia's historical exploitation through copper mining or colonial legacies. Without specific details, this section remains speculative. 5. Africa versus Europe 2025. The Africa versus Europe 2025 theme likely refers to escalating tensions between African nations and European powers, driven by demands for economic sovereignty and historical redress. Key points include historical exploitation. African leaders, including Traoré, have criticized Europe for centuries of colonial exploitation, from resource extraction to unfair trade agreements. Zambia, for instance, has long exported copper to Europe with minimal local benefit, a grievance echoed across the continent. Reparations and trade. Calls for reparations, as suggested by Zambia's alleged demands, reflect a broader push to address colonial-era wealth transfers. The EU's trade policies, such as the Economic Partnership Agreements, EPAs, are often criticized for favoring European markets over African development. Geopolitical shifts. The AES's rejection of French influence and pivot to Russia highlights a broader realignment. Traoré's expulsion of French troops and termination of exploitative agreements exemplify this shift. Europe's declining influence is contrasted with growing Russian and Chinese presence in Africa. No specific 2025 event labeled Africa versus Europe is documented, but the phrase captures the ongoing ideological and economic confrontation, amplified by leaders like Traoré and social media narratives. 6. African leaders unite. The theme of African leaders uniting is central to Traoré's Pan-Africanist vision and the AES, which seeks to foster regional solidarity against external interference. Key developments include AES formation. Burkina Faso, Mali, and Niger formed the AES after expelling French forces and withdrawing from ECOWAS, signaling a rejection of Western-aligned regional bodies. This alliance prioritizes security and economic cooperation, with Russia as a key partner. Solidarity protests. In April 2025, thousands rallied across West Africa, Burkina Faso, Ghana, Liberia, in support of Traoré and the AES, denouncing foreign interference after a foiled coup attempt. This suggests grassroots support for unity against perceived neo-colonialism. Zambia's role. While Hichilema has not formally joined the AES, posts on X suggest Zambia's alignment with Traoré's ideology, though this lacks confirmation. African leaders' unity is often rhetorical, with practical challenges like differing national interests hindering cohesive action. The African Union and figures like Ghana's John Mahama, inaugurated January 2025, also promote unity, but ideological divides between revolutionary, Traoré, and reformist, Hichilema leaders complicate a unified front. 7. Reclaim Africa's wealth. Reclaiming Africa's wealth is a core theme of Traoré's agenda and resonates across the continent. Burkina Faso's reforms, Traoré's nationalization of gold mines, creation of a state mining corporation, SOPAMIB, and establishment of gold reserves aim to retain Burkina Faso's mineral wealth. These moves contrast with historical patterns where foreign companies dominated resource extraction. Zambia's context. Zambia's copper industry, controlled by foreign firms like Glencore, has long been a point of contention. Hichilema's government has pushed for greater local control, though not as radically as Traoré. The 2024 study noting black South African households' wealth disparity, 5% of white households, underscores similar inequalities in Zambia. Broader movement. Leaders across Africa, inspired by Traoré, advocate redirecting resource wealth to education, healthcare, and food security. The AES's rejection of the CFA franc is a symbolic step toward economic sovereignty. This movement faces challenges, including entrenched foreign interests, corruption, and security crises that divert resources from development. 8. Burkina Faso Traoré news. Beyond the points in Ibrahim Traoré latest news, additional developments include gold industry nationalization. In April 2025, Burkina Faso granted a mining license to Russia's Nordgold, signaling continued Russian influence in its resource sector. Social media influence. Traoré's popularity is amplified by social media, with misleading posts, e.g., a Serbian protest mislabeled as French support for Traoré, boosting his global image. Criticism and risks. Analysts warn that Traoré's authoritarianism and failure to address jihadist violence could undermine his reforms. The Council on Foreign Relations calls him a tyrant, pointing to Africa's governance issues. Traoré's cult-like following, evident in rallies and online support, contrasts with practical challenges in delivering on his promises. 9. African Revolution 2025. The idea of an African Revolution 2025 encapsulates Traoré's vision and the broader push for systemic change. Traoré's leadership. His self-styled revolution involves anti-colonial policies, resource nationalization, and rejecting Western military presence. This resonates with youth frustrated by unemployment, inequality, and foreign dominance. Regional impact. The AES's formation and solidarity protests suggest a revolutionary wave, particularly in the Sahel, though its sustainability is uncertain due to security and economic challenges. Zambia's role. Zambia's alleged reparations demands, if true, could align with this revolutionary rhetoric. But Hichilema's moderate approach makes this unlikely without clearer evidence. The revolution is more ideological than structural, with social media amplifying its reach but also spreading misinformation. 10. Traoré EU-UK confrontation. No specific Traoré EU-UK confrontation is detailed in the references, though Traoré's broader anti-Western stance targets former colonial powers like France, the EU, and, by extension, the UK. His expulsion of French troops and criticism of Western imperialism implicitly challenge EU-UK influence. The ex-posts mentioning a scandal with the EU and UK are inconclusive without verifiable details. This confrontation may refer to Traoré's rejection of Western aid conditions or trade agreements, such as those tied to the CFA franc or EU partnerships, but no direct 2025 event is confirmed. 11. Zambia demands reparations. The claim that Zambia demands reparations, specifically billions from EU and UK, appears in ex-posts but lacks substantiation from credible sources. The post by @BarristerJojo24 specifically mentions Hichilema demanding refunds for visa fees, framing it as exposing Western exploitation. This could reflect Zambia's frustration with bureaucratic or financial barriers imposed by Western nations, but no official policy or speech confirms this. Zambia's historical context: colonial exploitation by the UK and ongoing foreign dominance in its copper industry, supports calls for reparations in principle. However, Hichilema's administration has prioritized economic partnerships with the West, making a radical reparations demand unlikely without evidence. 12. Western exploitation of Africa. Western exploitation remains a central grievance. Historical context: colonial powers like the UK and France extracted vast wealth from Africa, leaving legacies of inequality. In Zambia, British control of copper mines enriched colonial coffers while impoverishing locals. Modern dynamics: foreign companies dominate Africa's resource sectors, with profits often repatriated. Traoré's nationalization efforts and Zambia's push for better mining deals reflect resistance to this. Visa and trade issues: the alleged visa fee refund demand highlights bureaucratic exploitation, where African citizens face high costs and rejection rates for Western visas. Trade agreements like the EU's EPAs are criticized for undermining African industries. This theme fuels Pan-Africanist movements but faces resistance from entrenched global economic structures. 13. African Unity Movement. The African Unity Movement, exemplified by the AES and Traoré's rhetoric, seeks to counter fragmentation and external influence. AES as a model: the alliance's rejection of ECOWAS and Western partnerships signals a push for self-reliance. Challenges: differing ideologies, e.g., Traoré's radicalism versus Hichilema's pragmatism, and economic disparities hinder unity. The African Union struggles to enforce cohesive policies. Grassroots support: protests and social media amplify calls for unity, but misinformation, e.g., mislabeled protests, complicates the narrative. 14. Billion-dollar scandal Africa. The billion-dollar scandal lacks clear documentation in the references. The ex-posts linking it to Traoré and Zambia's reparations demands suggest a narrative of financial exploitation by the EU and UK, possibly tied to visa fees or resource extraction. Without verified details, this appears to be a social media-driven claim rather than a confirmed event. 15. End of Western dominance in Africa. The notion of ending Western dominance is a key theme in 2025. Geopolitical shifts: the AES's pivot to Russia and China challenges Western influence. Economic moves: nationalization and rejection of Western financial systems, e.g., CFA franc, aim to reduce dependency. Limits: Western companies still dominate key sectors, and internal challenges like corruption and insecurity slow progress. Zambia's reliance on Western debt relief underscores this complexity. While symbolic victories, e.g., French troop expulsions, signal change, complete decoupling from Western influence remains aspirational. Conclusion: the themes you've outlined reflect a growing Pan-Africanist sentiment, driven by leaders like Traoré and amplified by social media. Zambia's alleged alignment with Traoré and demands for reparations, while prominent online, lack verifiable evidence and may be exaggerated. Traoré's revolutionary agenda, including resource nationalization and anti-Western rhetoric, inspires many but faces practical challenges. The broader movement for African unity and economic sovereignty confronts entrenched global structures, with mixed progress. For further details on specific claims, e.g., Hichilema's speech or the EU-UK scandal, I recommend checking primary sources like official government statements or reputable news outlets, as social media posts are inconclusive.